what's the deal with this systemic racism we keep hearing about? Like, why is it such a big deal? Right? Like, I mean, sure, like it's a one or two bad apples being racist and saying the N word to black people. I mean, but how does that affect wider society, right? Like, it couldn't have a wider effect, right? Other than, getting black women killed in their homes and police not being held to account for such murders. But aside from that, like, what effect could it have on society? Um, Turns out quite a bit. Economist finds $16 trillion when she totaled cost of racial bias. So this is an article from Bloomberg Business Week. And yes, this is going to be an article from the perspective of capitalists, guys. Um, well, okay, Wagonator. Uh, it's not that black and trans people are weak. It's that they are constantly under threat from the dominant power groups in the country. Like, you understand that, right? Like, it's not that the issue isn't that you don't see them as equal. The issue is that you don't recognize and understand the way that they are alienated from the existing power structure. Like that's the problem. Like, if you understood them as being equal, you would also understand that they're discriminated against more than white men are, you know? Like, you would understand if you saw them as equal. Um I mean, I guess you could whisper it to a mod and they can give me the link, but links won't post in chat if you're not a mod, okay? Um but also, like, the issue is not that black or trans people are weak. It's that white people continually overstep their bounds while being the most fragile group out of all of them. White people can't take jokes at their expense. It's true. They can't. I say that as a white person. I've seen so many more conservatives get upset over, like, one offhanded time a group of black people were chanting about like cops being pigs. Like, I've seen more white people getting upset about that than I've ever seen white people getting upset about blackface. Um, like, I don't know. I feel like that's it's just a fact of living in our society. But with that being said, what you're talking about has like nothing to do with what I'm talking about, so I'm not going to get derailed. Okay. Maybe after we finish this segment. Okay, bud. But yeah, turns out racial bias. As Wagonator says, these jokes don't matter, but it turns out when you further alienate by on the basis of race, you're actually costing the economy around $16 trillion over the course of 2 decades. Um, as protests as protests against racial injustice erupted across the US in late May, an economist on Wall Street set her usual work of analyzing monetary policy and all things macro set aside to try her hand at something few in her field have attempted, quantifying the cost of racism to the world's largest economy. From her home in northern New Jersey, Dana Peterson, who at the time was global economist at Citigroup, got to work parsing data stretching over 2 decades, a period that included the longest economic expansion in American history. Several months later, um, well, you understand that, like, the prevailing power structure defends itself, right? Like, that's why you'll get, like, conservative white people defending Pops and Breonna Taylor case, despite the fact that they, like, legitimately don't know any of the facts of the case. And despite the fact that their entire political ideology is against big government coming in to mess with their lives, they somehow find it within their ideological framework to argue that cops should be able to break into your home and murder you, even if you're innocent, and you know receive no punishment for doing so. So like you understand how like the prevailing power structure defends itself and is self perpetuating. It's really not that hard to understand, even in the framework of what we're talking about here. Um, where literally being racist, literally making these alienating jokes, costs us $16 trillion. Um, aren't leftists supposedly against these broad racial generalizations? No. Like, leftists understand the larger picture, my friend. I'm sure you can find several black people who haven't been racially discriminated against, but also, like, to ignore the systemic biases that exist in our society that are relics of, like, Jim Crow and segregation, things that were still existent within our lifetimes, by the way. Uh, like, it's really not that hard to understand that those effects are still hitting our society in profound ways. 400 years of enslaving a racial group doesn't disappear overnight. 1,000 years of supporting a patriarchal power structure doesn't just disappear because trans people suddenly exist, okay? Like, it's really not that hard to understand. But, like, the fact that black people have as many rights as white people now really irks a lot of white people. And the fact that trans people have the audacity to want to use the bathroom in public really irks a lot of cisgender people. And that's where those jokes about it being ridiculous to identify as an attack helicopter, because like the ideology behind that joke is that identifying as something other than male or female is as ridiculous as wanting to identify as an attack helicopter. It's really not that complicated. How do we move on and put it behind us? Well, exactly, Waganator. Like that's the thing. We can put this behind us and make it disappear by implementing programs that address that society-wide inequality. For example, um, one of the existing pressures on society right now is that black families have on average 1/40th the wealth of white families. And we can alleviate this not by necessarily um, giving black people money directly, like a lot of people think when the topic of reparations comes up, but we can do it by addressing, community-wide concerns, whether that is making community investment in black folk a priority, or investing in inner city schools, even if they are not necessarily being supported by the property taxes, as is property taxes, by the way, are usually how schools are funded, which is why inner city schools tend to have way less money than their suburban counterparts. So having programs that invest in inner city schools, having these programs that impact black folk more than they might impact white folk. Um, I think having those kinds of community-wide programs, having like investing in community centers, investing in after-school activities, investing in black businesses, like these are things that we can do to address these systemic issues. Um, or like another thing, like having giving black kids the opportunity to go to college and pursue what might otherwise be extremely expensive degrees, like lowering the cost of college education in this country would disproportionately help black people, because disproportionately black people are kept out of higher education by the high cost of said education. So like lowering that has so many more knock-on effects. Like, for example, did you know that black people are, on average, more likely to die in a medical situation by, like, a huge factor when it comes to going into a hospital? This is why, by the way, there are a lot of black folk who are nervous about hospitals and health issues or distrustful of the medical establishment. It's because there are different outcomes for white patients and black patients. Like black mothers die more often than white mothers. Um, black people who need resuscitation efforts get on average far less time to resuscitate them by medical staff than white people do. And part of that is because the overwhelming amount of people in the medical establishment are white, and they have these internalized biases about what it means to treat black people that might not actually be correct. So there are all of these things that we can do that have knock-on effects to improve our wider society, which is exactly what this woman is talking about, by the way. Um, so, like, she compiled a report, a 104-page report, and like we can go into the weeds all day long about how such programs might be implemented. By the way, but all I'm saying is that we could be doing these things. We just don't really. And what we do instead really comes down to affirmative action, which is necessary because historically, white people have been the overwhelming benefits of affirmative action over other groups, white men specifically. Um, and so affirmative action in the other way helps to address that historic imbalance. The project, which culminated in the publication of a 104-page report in September, was also a way for 44-year-old Peterson, who left Citi last month to become chief economist at the conference board, to exercise some of her own experiences of racism. During an interview, she recalled being on the subway in New York as a schoolgirl when she and her teen friend were stopped and frisked by the police. While attending Wesleyan University, she encountered classmates who questioned whether her admission to the elite Connecticut college was a result of affirmative action policies rather than her own merit. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Then there was the time early in her career when, on showing up to meet a prospective employer, she saw the look of disappointment on his face when he said he had been expecting someone whose features conformed more to her Scandinavian-sounding name. I felt like I was telling part of my own story, says Peterson of the report. Yeah, you know what, Ninja Tuna, I 100% agree with you. I am in favor of making college and secondary education free for all. I think that that is something that is very worth doing, and the economic benefits of doing so are pretty evident in most studies done on the subject. Let's see. Peterson showed how disparities along racial fault lines in housing, education, policing, and voting all feed into one another to restrict the access of Black Americans and other minorities to employment, higher incomes, and the ability to build wealth. Housing segregation, for example, leads to unequal access to quality education. Interesting. This is something I just talked about. Growing up poor, meanwhile, boosts the likelihood that incarceration will diminish job opportunities. And as we know, one of the sociological realities of our capitalist society is if you are born poor, you're more likely to die poor. If you're born rich, you're more likely to die rich. So if you're growing up poor, that boosts the likelihood that you're going to be also incarcerated, which diminish your job opportunities. Because our penal system is much more oriented around punishment rather than rehabilitation. Which creates a vicious cycle that capitalists use for cheap labor in the United States, because it can be used as slave labor. Legally, prisoners can be used as slaves. Sifting through granular data such as student loan debt and occupation breakdowns by race, information that is usually the preserve of think tanks and academics rather than Wall Street economists, Peterson said that inequities exist at every juncture, be it when Black Ivy League graduates are paid less than white counterparts, or the struggles that Black business owners face when trying to secure investment from venture capitalists. So this is what I'm talking about when it comes to Black business owners struggling to get investment. The government could be stepping in to help those businesses get off the ground, because those businesses, by the way, generally perform as well as white businesses. The issue being that they are usually denied funding because the person trying to get the funding is black. Um, by her calculations, an additional 6.1 million jobs per year could be created, and 13 trillion in business revenue could have been generated over the last 2 decades. So, just to really hammer this home, if we lived in a society where we had properly addressed racial bias, we could have created over the last 20 years around 120 million jobs. 120 million jobs. Sorry, 120 million. Wow. Wow. Wait, yes. Yes. Right? Yes. My math is right. Fuck you. Now, obviously there would probably be some sort of a cap in there. That number was just so large, my brain balked for a moment. Obviously, this number would cap off at some point, and level off because, like, we only have like 300 million people in the United States. But like, the amount of job growth we could create by just not living in a racist society is incredible. Like here's the thing, guys. Here's the thing about capitalism. And if you're a socialist like I am, this might make you mauled a little bit. But capitalism is actually good at doing some things. And one of the things that capitalism is good at is incentivizing the treatment of people equitably if your goal is to grow an economy. Now, often capitalists have different goals, like subjugating certain areas of the population to use them as extremely cheap labor. But if your goal, like a government's goal might be, is to grow the economy and be as wealthy as possible, adding 6 million jobs per year to an economy is incredible. And this should be a goal that we have as a capitalist country. $13 trillion in revenue is nothing to sneeze at. We could have that. We could be generating an additional, 13 divided by 20. I can't math off the top of my head, guys. I don't want to, I opened the wrong app. I opened the wrong app. It's fine. Okay. 13 divided by 20. We could be adding an extra $650 billion to our economy every year. But we don't, because our systems and our populace is generally racist. If we were able to address that racism, we could have millions more jobs, like almost over half a trillion dollars in revenue every year on top of what we already do. But we don't have that. So that's part of the problem here. Um, yeah. If Let's see, could have been generated over the last 2 decades if black entrepreneurs had fair and equitable access to credit. By the way, this is just when it comes to black entrepreneurs having fair and equitable access to credit. If we lived in a world where banks didn't discriminate against black people, just banks, we could be having this. That's not even addressing the other issues of incarceration, housing, health, like the other things that she brought up earlier. That's just if black entrepreneurs had fair and equitable access to credit. All of these different levels of society and achievement, there are these roadblocks. It's pyramidal. Over the course of her research, Peterson said she was most struck by an analysis conducted by the Urban Institute on the gap in home ownership rates. The nonprofit said that after accounting for differences in income, education, credit score, and marital status, 17% of the difference between black and white households remained unaccounted for. That was shocking. That potentially 1 in 5 rejections alone might be attributable to bias or racism. Yeah, so just to be clear here, what what this accounts for is literally they take in all of the aspects that banks take into account when like offering home loans. Um, so if a black family has the same income, the same education, the same credit score, the same marital status, there is still 17% of them who are denied home loans. That's a pretty big number that is again unaccounted for, which means it begs the question, why are 17% of these prospective homeowners getting denied loans for seemingly no reason on like when you look at the major aspects that banks look at when deciding on offering home loans. And the potential answer to that is bias and racism, unfortunately. Um, so Peterson says equitable access to home loans could have resulted in 770,000 additional black homeowners since 2000. So we could have almost like 750,000 black people in homes. And part of the reason that that is a big deal is because one of the major ways that average people are able to build wealth is through homeownership. So this means 250,000 black folk since 2000 have been denied the opportunity to build wealth effectively as white people. So there are all of these systemic barriers to the success of black folk, and it's really, really depressing that this is both depressing and also very impressive on Dana Peterson's part to assemble all of this data. Um, let's see. Yeah, with combined sales and expenditures adding 218 billion to gross domestic product. Peterson calculated that by closing the various gaps between blacks and whites, the U.S. could stand to gain an additional 5 trillion in economic activity over the next 5 years. Not an insignificant number as the U.S. struggles to recover from the economic downturn caused by COVID-19 pandemic. Let me just look up one thing real quick. Yeah, so by the way, our gross domestic product is roughly around $20.5 trillion a year. So we could literally add 1/20th to our total economy just by closing the gaps between black people and white people and offering them the same opportunities on a systemic level. Just by doing that, we could add 1/20th to our economy every year. Um, like, do you know how much do you know how much $1 trillion every year could do? Like, let's just let me just take a look here at um so according to American Progress, it would cost around 20 billion to end homelessness in the United States. 20 billion. Do you know how many billions are in $1 trillion? It's 1,000. There are 1,000 billions in a trillion. Um, so with the smallest fraction of the additional economic activity by just the United States stopping to its racism, we could easily end homelessness. We could end hunger in the United States as a concept. We could literally provide most needs for people with $1 trillion. Like, I haven't done the research on that necessary, but I do know it costs far less than $1 trillion to address homelessness every year in the United States. I know that it costs far less than $1 trillion to address hunger in the United States. I know it, like we could solve so many problems by just not being racist in the United States. Citigroup's report comes at a time when Federal Reserve is paying increasing attention to the plight of Black Americans and other minorities who have been disproportionately negatively affected during the pandemic. The presidents of the Atlanta, Boston, and Minneapolis Reserve Banks have pledged to add minority voices to the compilation of the central bank's Beige Book report, which highlights the views of businesses and corporate chiefs in each district. Additional groups have also tallied the economic costs of racism. Altarum, a nonprofit in Ann Arbor, Michigan, said 2 years ago that the U.S. could realize an $8 trillion gain in gross domestic product by 2050 by closing racial equity gaps. A McKinsey and Co. report that was published last year projected that the racial wealth gap in the United States economy is as much as 1.5 trillion, or will cost the U.S. as much as 1.5 trillion between 2019 and 2028 because of its dampening effect on consumption and investment, showing the impact of inequities is important because disparate audiences have different motivations, and we think it's important to show the impact on the economy, says Shelley Stewart III, a McKinsey partner who is one of the report's authors and has a very pretentious name. Yeah. During her 18-year stretch at Citigroup, Peterson said she didn't put her photograph on the company's email system because of her race. I had a very real fear that people would judge the quality of my work, whether they wanted to work with me by my picture. Peterson didn't have that option at her new job, but says that at this point in her career, she's not bothered by it. My older self would have told my younger self to be bolder and less fearful, but you make decisions based on the now that you live in. Now, here is that 104-page report that she assembled, and I will link it in the description when I cut this video for YouTube and as a highlight on Twitch, so we can you can look it over if you'd like, you know. But yeah, it's kind of a big deal here. Oh yeah, Slash, the Chud in chat was not very interesting. Just your typical like bot like Trump 2020 trying to get like a rise. Um so yeah. Now let's take a little peek at some good news. The San Francisco Karen Act lets people sue over racist 9/11 calls. Um, so the city is all set to pass this into law, and turns out if white people call the police on people of color for no reason, they're now violating the law in San Francisco. I think that is, or they will soon be violating the law, rather. Uh, so, Karens beware. Also, Breonna Taylor was not a drug dealer, my friend. Um, yes, the Karen Act. The Karen Act, indeed. Um, Also, Riot Girl Callie, can you please give them a warning to perhaps amend their behavior before banning them? That was fairly blatant and obvious, but I want to give them some opportunity to maybe change their mind. You know, I realize it's a very David Crowder. Is that his name? Steven Crowder. Why did I think it was David Crowder? I realize it's a very Steven Crowder-esque change my mind situation where they're not going to change their minds, but it does give me an opportunity to be like, no, you're a dumb idiot who doesn't know the facts of the case. Breonna Taylor, by the way, was never a drug dealer. Her ex-boyfriend, it turned out, was a drug dealer, but she didn't know about that, and now she's dead. I don't know. I don't feel like if you accidentally associate with someone that you don't know is a drug dealer, and then you get murdered for having that association, I feel like that's a pretty blatant miscarriage of justice. You know, just I guess very very technically, you could say that Breonna Taylor is a drug was a drug dealer, but only in the sense that she was a medical professional who was like, qualified to give people drugs to save their lives, because she worked as like a paramedic. So like, um, well, Ninja Tuna, when you time someone out or ban them, their messages also get deleted. I believe that's how that works. Um, I'm still learning Twitch. Okay. Yes, Sazrath. The shake my head. The state-sponsored drug dealing by these doctors saving people's lives. How dare they? Um, hey, Ninja Tuna, we can learn Twitch together. Okay. Um, Yeah, the board has received written complaints from 8 people, several whose names have different spellings of Karen, saying they support the legislation but object to its moniker because they call it sexist and ageist. I'm not entirely sure how it's ageist. Vic Vicari, what kind of D&D ass name is this? Wrote that the insensitive use of the name as a general purpose term of disapproval for middle-aged white women needs to stop. Karen Karen Silva said she loves the name her mom gave her and called it a racist term against white women. But black women can also be called Karen. What? What? uh, gosh. I don't think Ninja Tuna is a racist. But I mean, you can always answer the question for yourself, I guess. Maybe you know what? Maybe you're a racist. I don't know. You should probably clarify that. Um, let's see. Karen Batides asked if the supervisor would want his name mocked. Yes, I am named Karen, and I do speak up for injustices on a regular occasion, wrote Karen Shane. So, could we attempt at coming up with some other acronym that doesn't vilify a whole group of people named Karen, Karen, Karen? I don't know. Maybe I'm mean, okay? Maybe I'm being mean by finding this very funny. Reached by phone, Shane, who lives in a San Francisco Bay Area suburb, describes herself as a middle aged white woman, readily pokes fun at her first name, and said she's aware that even complaining about it is something that a Karen would do. But she feels the supervisor did not need to cheapen what she agrees is important legislation. By using the name Karen, he's just perpetuating a racial divide. Granted, it's not a protected class, but it's somebody's name. I don't feel strongly enough about this to not find it very funny. Uh oh, you know what, Ninja Tuna, I will go to bat saying that Trump supporters are either racist or they are racist enough to not care about the racism. Like kind of like if somebody's like in the 1800s, like, look, I'm not voting for in favor of the slave states positions. I'm just voting for it because I think it's good for the economy. Like, yeah, like, okay, you don't care about the fact that like your states allow slaves, but like you you or like you don't support their right to own slaves, but also you're voting for that party who's in favor of owning slaves, um, because it benefits you economically or something like that. Like, I feel like if you're putting money over like racial equality, like there is some element of racism at play there. And like Donald Trump repeatedly dog whistles about like needing to protect the white women and the white people and like the white suburbs. Like it's oh yeah, the all lives matter thing is a racist thing as well. Like I think that if someone is warned, hey, these are racist dog whistles. Please don't use them in this chat, and then they continue to use them. Well, then that is I think pretty good evidence that they are pretty racist. Yeah, the all racist enough to not acknowledge racism. That's true. Yeah. Like that's the issue that I have with a lot of Trump supporters. It's a lot of them are like, I'm not racist. I just want the economic benefits of voting for Trump that I think will benefit me. It's like, oh, okay, cool. You're willing to sell out an entire race of people in this country uh, to benefit yourself. I don't think that that's a good argument against you not being racist, you know? Um, and like the whole Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter thing, like, yeah, if you're saying like all lives matter to like take attention away from the fact that like black people are the victims of systemic oppression in the United States, like, yeah, you're being kind of racist, right?